Shalom friends, welcome. This is Eliyahu Shear from Chesed Ve'emet, www.lovingkindness.co, and we're learning another Shear of Tanya today. We're learning from the book Lessons in Tanya, the famous Chabad work Lessons in Tanya, published by Kahut Publication Society, and it is presented in front of us here on the Chabad.org site with the permission of the Kahut Publication Society. I'm not making use of it in any illegal manner. I hope that you will enjoy it as much as I enjoy going through it with you. And what we're doing is you can see the text in front with the Hebrew and the English, so that if there's anything that I'm mistranslating or not getting 100% right, please feel free to read the notes while I'm talking or go back through the notes. Of course, you can get yourself a hard copy book as well, or alternatively, just go through on Chabad.org site where you can see the text in front of you and go through as much as you want. We're currently on chapter number 4, and we're discussing the aspect of the 10 soul powers. And when we spoke about these soul powers, we spoke about the aspect of coming from the Chabad. First of all, there is this Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at, which is in the head of a person, in the mind of a person. And thereafter, we have to get the Chabad, the intelligence, the intellect of ourselves, what we learn. We have to bring it through ourselves and put it into the midot, into the emotions of ourselves, into the Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and the Malchus. And the first steps that we take is in channeling the Chabad into the aspects of fear and love of God. And the first aspect that we go through is called the fear of God, and the second aspect is the love of God. If a person doesn't have fear of God, he will never come to perform any mitzvot. If he doesn't have love of God, well, I should say better yet, if he doesn't have fear of God, not only will he not perform mitzvot, but he will be unfazed. He will feel totally apathetic about the idea, perhaps even completely against the concept of doing anything wrong against God. The only time that one can feel that one is obligated to refrain from the negative commandments that God has given us is when we fear God. So the main thing is that the first thing we need to do is to have fear of God. The fear of God will assist us in refraining from committing any of the averot. The second level is the love of God. Once we've learned how to fear God, we can put that into practice into a deeper level by coming to love God. When we love God, we desire to perform his mitzvot. Now, here's the catch. When a person does not fear God, and this is what we're talking about here, that a person has to be called to avas Hashem asher sanei hema klippos v'sitra achra. All the abominations that Hashem hates, which are the klippot, which means the shells and the husks, and the sitra achra, which means the other side. And basically what this means is the level of fear that we have to have is that we despise anything that is an abomination to God, that is what he hates. God does not like the klipot and the sitra achra. Why? Asher yinikasam, that the suckling, the nurture of the klipot is meha'adam tachton, comes from the lower man. V'achizasam bo, and his hold upon him, the hold that the klipot have on the person comes from the 365 negative commandments of the Torah, which means to say as follows. When a person is engaged in Aveira, what he is effectively doing is he's clicking in with the sources of negativity, the sources of the klippah, the sources of the shell, the sources of the sitra achra, the other side. And the other side are able to suckle off through the power that a person gives to those forces, the forces of negative energy. When a person commits an Aveira, he literally gives off the negative energy from himself, which is actually coming off in a way of positivity. It comes through from his holy soul, and it gives nurture to the sources of evil, to the klippah and to the sitra achra. When a person transgresses a prohibitive commandment, God forbid, he provides the klipot with additional strength and vitality. Since klipot and the sitra achra are entities which conceal godliness and holiness and are as such despised by God, the Jew therefore guards himself against transgressing. He is ashamed to transgress and give the klipot strength and life. Thus, fear of God clothes itself in the observance of the prohibitive commandments. For one's fear of God enables him to withstand temptation and refrain from transgression. A person who is on the level who wants to refrain from any transgression needs to put inside himself this element of fear of God. Once he fears God, once he is in awe of God, he says to himself, why must I give of my strength to the forces of evil, to the bad side? If I give to the bad side, it is only going to strengthen them. This is very similar to the idea of if a person has money to give to tzedakah, for example, he has in his pocket $100. Okay. So I'm just going back from here. We're speaking about the klippah, and we're speaking about giving force to the klippah. When a person transgresses a prohibitive commandment, God forbid, he provides the klippot with additional strength and vitality. Since klippot and the sitra achra are entities which conceal godliness and holiness, and are as such despised by God, the Jew therefore guards himself against transgressing. He is ashamed to transgress and gives the klippot strength and life. Thus, fear of God clothes itself in the observance of prohibitive commandments. For one's fear of God enables him to withstand temptation and refrain from transgression. We now understand clearly how fear and love of God are related to the fulfillment of the commandments, and how the mitzvot are the root and life force in the performance of commandments in both action and speech. In other words, at this point in time, we have taken the Chabad, we have taken the mind, we have taken the concept that exists in the Chokhmah, Bina, and Das. We've brought it down into the midot of the fear of God. And at this point in time, a person feels this awe and respect, and the respect leads him ultimately to refrain from committing any of the 365 prohibitive commandments. And what he has to keep in mind is that when he is involved in the action of one of the negative commandments, for example, the Torah says, don't eat blood of an animal. When a person is engaged in this avera and he eats the blood, he brings the blood of this non-kosher animal and the blood even of a kosher animal that was supposed to have been removed from the animal, he brings it into his system, and he gives power to the forces of negativity, to the forces of evil. This can be compared to a person, for example, who has $100 to give to charity, and he has two people that he can give the money to. One person requires the $100 because he needs food and he can survive, and as a result of that, he can provide further purpose to the world, goodness and kindness. The other fellow requires a gun. He needs to purchase a gun. What will he do with the gun? He wishes to, God forbid, kill somebody. And you say to him, well, let me give him $100 because he needs money for his gun. Well, obviously, if a person is going to use his money in this way, he's going to be giving it to a source of negativity, of evil. And this, as a result of this, is going to cause a great problem for the world in general. The 365 negative commandments are God's way of telling us that these are forces of negativity that must be refrained from. When we engage in an activity which is filled with one of these 365 negative commandments, we give strength to the powers of negativity, and this is dangerous. And that is what we're learning about over here. We don't want to give power to the side of the klippah and to the sitra achra. And that is why it is so important that we have fear of God. Fear of God is the only thing that will stop us from committing averot. Now, until now, it has been explained that the divine soul has three garments in which it clothes itself. This is what we already discussed: the thought, speech, and action of Torah and the commandments. So everything that we go through in life is going to come through three levels. One, we're going to think about it. Two, we're going to speak about it. And ultimately, it's going to come through in speech in some way or another. Even if it doesn't actually come out through our mouths, it comes through in the thought process that we think out the words of what it is that we're going to want to do. And then we implement this into action. These three aspects are the garments of the soul. We have the soul powers, which work underneath the garments and cause things to happen. And we have the garments, which implement the soul powers into reality. The Alter Rebbe now goes on to state that unlike physical garments, which are less important than their wearer, the garments of the divine soul are even loftier than the soul which wears them. Thus, wearing its garments, i.e., thinking and speaking words of Torah and acting in performance of the commandments, elevates the soul to a higher level. For since Torah and the commandments are one with God, the Jew, by donning the garments of Torah and the commandments, all the garments of Torah and the commandments, also becomes united with him. In the Alter Rebbe's words. So here we see over here an amazing thing, that though it is that garments are usually inferior to the wearer. For example, don't judge the book by its cover, or don't judge a person's garments and say you can work out who the person is in totality because of the garments that he wears. For example, we go to Hollywood and we see on Hollywood on a particular set that people are dressed up as doctors. And then there's somebody who's dressed up in a suit and he's taking on the role as the accountant. And there's somebody who's dressed up in shabby garments and so on and so forth. They begin to film the scene. When the scene is over, you approach everybody on the scene and you say, thank you, doctor. You say to him, thank you, Mr. Accountant, for attending to all the accounts that go on here. And you turn to Mr. Shabby, who's the beggar, and you give him $100 and you say to him, I hope that this will help you. Well, of course, anybody who does that will be making a serious mistake. It could well be that the fellow who's dressed up as a doctor is actually the poorest man on the set. He has been given a role that takes up only 5 minutes of the storyline. And because of that, he gets paid very little. He's not a very wealthy man, but he's very lucky that he was given this role and he looks like an important person. On the other hand, the beggar in the story is the main character. And in fact, he's the fellow who walks home at the end of the movie with $10 million in his pocket for his outstanding acting skills. So we see over here that garments can fool one. And therefore, garments can be, in fact, inferior to who the person really is. They don't tell the full story. So the truth of the matter is that although it's that way, for the godly soul, the garments is giving over the higher level of who the person is. The garment is telling everybody really what the story is. The physical garments we wear are only artificial. This fellow wears a suit. He looks important, but maybe he's not so. This fellow is wearing shabby garments, but maybe he's a very wealthy fellow. The garment doesn't give him away. Be careful how you judge the person in the way that he's dressed, because perhaps we're making a mistake. But when it comes to the revelation of the godly soul, we can well judge by the actions, by the thought and the speech that a person is involved in, what he is really capable of and who he really is. The garments are greater than the soul itself because they reveal the greatness of the soul. And behold, these three garments from the Torah and its mitzvahs, even though they're called garments, lenefesh, ruach, uneshama, for the three lower levels of the soul. Remember, we've discussed this many, many times, and of course, we're going to see it again and again. There is the nefesh, ruach, and neshama, which rests inside the body. And even though we have these garments, and they're called only garments, im kol zeh gavha ugdala ma'alasam le'ein kates v'sof. Listen to these beautiful, powerful words. Nevertheless, the greatness of these garments, the level that they are, is ein kates v'sof. There is no end to the greatness that they are over the nefesh, ruach, and the neshama itself. Now, that's a powerful statement. The greatness of our garments goes far more than the greatness of the soul itself. In other words, without the garments, we can do nothing to express ourselves. If we really want to know who we are and we want to become the person that we want to become, we engage ourselves through these garments. As it's written in the Zohar, what's the verse that it says there? That the Torah and Kudsha Brichu, which means the Holy One, blessed is He, everything is one. What does it mean to say that the Torah and God is one? Torah is external, sounds to me like it's external, something external like a garment. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu sounds to me like it's something internal, it's God Himself. What does this mean? Pirush. The Oraisa, the Torah, Hi Chochmaso Uretzono Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Torah is the wisdom and the will of the Holy One, blessed is He. VaHaKadosh Baruch Hu Bichvoido Uvatzmo Kulu Chad. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His honor itself, everything is one. As he says over here, the wisdom of Torah expresses God's wisdom, its practical application and laws. Whether or not a particular object is kosher, expresses his will. And this expression that's coming across is one with his glory and his essence. Ki, why? Hu hayodea, he is the one who knows. V'hu hamada, he is the knowledge itself. V'hu hayadua, he is what is known. As we said before many times, Kamoshe Kosov Le'el B'Shem HaRambam, as the Rambam already expressed, God is all of these things. These three aspects, separate and distinct in terms of human intellect, are, as they relate to God, one and the same entity. They are all godliness. The Torah, being God's intellect, is thus one with God himself. And when a Jew understands and unites himself with it, he is united with God himself. But what is the Torah? The Torah is really the garments. From the above, we understand that since the garments of thought and speech of Torah study and the active performance of the commandments are united with God, they are even higher than the soul itself. However, a question presents itself. How can it be said that in understanding Torah, one comprehends God's wisdom and will, when God's wisdom, like God himself, is infinitely beyond man's limited comprehension? This will now be explained. So we see over here that the Torah is a garment of God. It's not really God himself, but it really is God himself, but it's expressed in a garment type of format. Even though God is called the Infinite One, and to his greatness there is no investigation, you can never really understand how great God is. The famous words of the Zohar, that there is no thought that can grasp God at all. Nothing can grasp God, and therefore how can I grasp God? Through Torah. How can I grasp God to the Torah? God is totally infinite. If I'm going to read the words of the Torah, which are simply letters made into words and sentences and paragraphs and parshiot, how will I ever get to touch God, to experience godliness? These are two different things. And so too with God's will and his wisdom, which are infinite and unfathomable, as it's written, there is no investigation to his understanding. Nobody will ever get to understand who God is. And it's written, if you investigate, you think that you can find God? Even if you investigate, even if you put effort in and you try to find who is God, where is he, you won't find him. And it's written, my thoughts are not your thoughts. It's getting worse and worse, it seems. It seems to me that God is so hidden that no matter how far I try to get to reach God, I will be unable to experience him. I will be unable to understand him. I'll be unable to know what it is that he even wants from me. Thus, human thought is incapable of grasping divine thought. How then can it be said that in understanding Torah, man grasps God's wisdom? Because we said above that the Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are all one. It's exactly the same, which means the words that I'm reading in this book, this is God himself. To this, the Alter Rebbe answers that God compressed and lowered his wisdom, clothing it in the physical terms and objects of Torah and its commandments, so that it might be accessible to human intelligence, in order that man may thereby be united with God. Let us imagine, for example, a story of a great professor who wishes to teach mathematics to a child who has just begun school, and the child is 6 years old, and the professor knows all the great theorems, trigonometry, geometry, all parts of arithmetic. He knows it backwards and forwards, and he wants to begin to teach this child mathematics. The child can also become and grow up to understand mathematics like the teacher. In fact, he can even become better than the teacher, which is not such a good example in this particular instance, but the principle remains the same. In order for the teacher to teach this child, which is a possibility, he can certainly do so on one condition. He has to lower his intelligence. He has to begin teaching the child 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, plus, minus, multiplication, division. Then he uses brackets. Then he squares it. Then he uses a square root. Then he uses an equation. Then he draws a picture. Then he shows how the angles equal certain things. Then the child begins to learn, and the child begins to realize that everything that he is learning is already what this mathematician is all about. God lowers himself in a way where he begins to reveal who he is in a low form. Now, the exciting part is like this. The more that we study Torah, the more we are able to come closer to this infinite being, even though it is that being infinite, we can never really get close enough to him to experience who he is. But nevertheless, God wants us to experience who he is. He wants us to know his will. How does he do that? He nails their amru, and about this they said, "B'makom she'ata motzei gedulaso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu," a very famous teaching. In that place that you find the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sham ata motzei anvasanuso. That is the same place you find his humility. When we look at the greatness of God, we find his humility, which means what? When we look at the humility of God, we know that that's where the greatness is. That is the irony of the world that we live in. We live in a world where we can't even see God. We don't even imagine that he exists. In fact, if we don't put in enough attention and focus, we will forget that God is there. If we do not recite brachot, we will forget that God is there. We'll eat our food and we'll forget that God is the one who blessed us with the food. And if when I get a new garment, I don't thank God for the new garment, I will forget that God is there. And when it comes to Shabbos and I didn't observe it, I will forget that God is there. Implication. In order to remind myself that God is there, I have to follow the Torah. Then the corollary comes about that says, if I start to observe what this is all about, I will become even closer to God. I will be able to experience it in more of reality, that I will realize that God is really there. How can we approach God's greatness to find it and be united with it? Through his humility, by his lowering himself to our level. When we begin to see the humility of God, that is when we have to wake up and see the greatness of God. When we see a tree outside and we think to ourselves, well, this is just nature. That's how it comes about. That is the humility of God. God is hiding behind the tree and he's waiting for us to find that that's really where he is. He has made himself garments, but that's where he is. If he were to reveal himself at that point in time and show us that he is the essence of the tree, we would expire because he wouldn't be able to take the light. It's like looking into the light of the sun and not having protection. If one wants to appreciate the real power of the sun, one needs to wear special glasses, in which case you never get to see the sun in its fullness, but you know it's there and you can appreciate it. So when God creates the tree, I can recognize that God is actually there, but unfortunately, because the tzimtzum, as we're going to see in 1 second, because the contraction of God is so great, it's almost like I don't see him. So what must I do? I remind myself that in the humility, there where God has humbled himself, that is where his greatness is. Where else did he humble himself? Inside the Torah. When I read the words of Torah, I see that inside the words of the Torah, where the humility of God is, there's his greatness. HaKadosh Baruch Hu constricted his will and his wisdom into the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah and through the halachas, which means, again, what we said before. The moment a person observes a mitzvah of the Torah, he is locking himself in. He's connecting with the Eivarim, with the limbs of God. He's actually connecting with the limb of God. This is, for example, like, I'll give an example of a person who, in today's times, we know about it, when certain assembly lines work and a technician is required to build a particular thing in which he could not put his hand onto the item itself because his hand would burn up or similar to that. What they do is they design a robot which has like an arm which is hollow, and the man puts his hand inside the hollow arm, and then through the manipulation of the hollow arm, he is able to effect a change in the item that he wants to change without coming to any harm himself. Because he uses the robotic arm with his own arm inside it, He's able to make a change somewhere. Now, of course, he's the person behind it, but without the robotic arm, nothing will take place because he'll be in trouble. He'll hurt himself. When we perform the mitzvot of the Torah, it is as if we're enclothing ourselves within the limb, so to speak, of Hashem. And therefore we connect directly with it, causing a reaction of blessing to flow into the world, fulfilling the will of what God wants. As mentioned above, the logic of the law represents divine wisdom, and the ruling is divine will. Torah, and through the joining of the letters of the Torah, Nevi'im Kesuvim, through the prophets and the writings, the very words themselves, when we read the Chumash, when we read the prophets, we read all about Isaiah, we read about Jeremiah, we read about Ezekiel, we read names of people, so-and-so, Ben so-and-so, who was from the family of so-and-so. And we read the writings and the works of Tehillim, the works of Mishlei, of Proverbs. We read the book of Job. We read all these different parts of Torah. And we think it's just stories, but we're wrong. Because through the formation, the permutation of the letters of the Torah and the Nevi'im and the Kesuvim, the very letters and words of Scripture contain God's will and wisdom. Wherefore, even one who is ignorant of their meaning fulfills the precept of Torah study by merely reciting them. Yes, when a person opens up the Chumash and he begins to read the words of the Torah, even if he doesn't really understand what he's talking about, he is connecting with this godly force, even if he doesn't know what's going on. When it comes to learning halakha, of course, or when it comes to learning Kabbalah, of course, or any other area of Torah especially, one must understand what one is learning. Because if you don't understand it, it doesn't help anything to learn the halachot of being involved in a beis din of a case between two people and not even understanding barely what the words are saying to make out what should be done. That's not going to help anybody. But when we read the words of the Torah, the Torah, Ketuvim, the Nevi'im, we are actually reading the permutations of God's will put down on a piece of paper. And all the droshes, all the stories, explanations of the Agadot, the story parts, or Midrashei Chachamenu Zal, and all the Midrashim of the rabbis, etc. And we do this in order that the soul, meaning the neshama, and the ruach, the other part of the soul, and the nefesh, and that's in the body of a person, will be able to understand them in his mind. And a person now begins to fulfill everything that he's learning to whatever degree he can. Everybody's different. The degree that I keep Shabbos is probably on a completely different degree to the great tzaddikim. It's like my Shabbos is probably minimal. It's like, where am I holding in terms of Shabbos when I compare myself to some of the greatest tzaddikim? But yet I'm keeping Shabbos on my level according to where I'm at. Because as we will learn later on, truth is something which is, as the Tanya will describe later on, like a pole. It's like a pole that reaches from the bottom of the earth to the heavens. And wherever you go onto this pole, you are still on the pole, no matter where you are. So you can be at the lowest part of the pole and still be on the right track. You're still on the pole. You can be in the middle of the pole. You're also on the same pole as the person on the lower part, but you're on the same pole. Or you could be on the very top of the pole, but still you are on the same level as everybody else on the pole. You're still on the pole, just that you're higher. One person is lower, one person is higher. Everybody is fulfilling the mitzvot according to the level that they can keep. It doesn't mean that a person is exempt, that he doesn't have to keep the mitzvah. He must keep the mitzvah. But the degree that he'll keep the mitzvah is not necessarily the same degree as somebody else. To the degree that I understand the Torah more, to the degree that I feel closer to Hashem, to that degree I will fulfill the mitzvah with more strength, with more love, with more devotion, with more fear. And a person will then fulfill these mitzvahs to the degree that he can in action, in speech, and in thought. And through this, he's going to dress himself up in all 10 aspects that we've been speaking about. Chochmah, Bina, Da'as, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. 10 aspects in 3 garments. That's what's going to happen to us. We spoke about the 10 powers of the soul. The moment a person performs the mitzvah, the moment a person speaks about the mitzvah, the moment a person thinks about the mitzvah, he engages his godly soul in all its aspects, being involved in the mitzvah entirely. V'lachein, and therefore, says the Alter Rebbe, nimshela haTorah l'mayim. The Torah is compared to water. Ma mayim yordim mimakom gavoa lemakom namuch, just as it is that water descends from a high place to a low place, which means water is different than light, for example, because the light that exists within the sun is not really the same light that exists on the earth. It comes from the sun, which is very powerful in its light, but the light that we receive here is of a different degree to the light of the sun. If it were to be the same degree as the light of the sun, we would all burn up. So therefore, light is not a good comparison for Torah. Light is another comparison for the Torah. But when you want to compare the Torah to something physical that we can understand, we use the example of water. Just as it is that water travels naturally because of gravity from a high level to a low level, so too the Torah travels from a high level to a low level. And what water do we find at the lower level in comparison to the water that was at the higher level? The exact same water. So too does it take place with Torah. The Torah that we have here in this world is the exact same Torah as it is in the higher worlds. All that has happened is that the Torah flows from a high level to a low level. The water which reaches the lower level is the same water that left its source within the higher level. Unlike light, for example, which also travels from its source, but in whose case it is not the source, the luminous body itself, that is transmitted, but only a ray of it. And unlike intellect, which can also be communicated from one person to another, but in whose case too, it is not the source, the teacher's mind itself, that transmits itself to the lower level, the student's mind, but only the idea, a product of the source. So we see over here also, when a person teaches somebody else, whatever it is that he's teaching, it is not the same thing. It would be fantastic if we could create a system in our heads that could work like a USB device. And what we would do is we'd plug in the USB device into the brain of one person, and we connect it with a wire to the next person who also has a USB device. We click a button and we transfer everything from one person to the next. What a fantastic idea. But this is not how education works, unfortunately. How it works is that one person has mastered the material, and he puts this material into a way that he understands it, and he relates it over to somebody else in the best way possible. When that person receives what he hears, he has to begin the process of education himself to understand what it is that the educator has told him, internalize the concept himself until eventually he understands it on the level that he understands it, and in turn he teaches it to somebody else. But the Torah itself is not comparable to that. The Torah that we receive in this world is the exact same Torah that exists in the higher worlds. What we are reading on this page over here is exactly as Torah exists in the higher worlds. When we read the Chumash, this is the Torah in the higher worlds. And when we read the Gemara, of course, and all the commentaries on the Gemara, even though it is written by a man, we must appreciate that the source of this is really, the essence is coming from, ultimately, from God himself. And what we see here is the essence of the Torah being put down on a piece of paper. Therefore, in conclusion, when we study Torah, the greatest thing that we can keep in our minds is that we are studying literally the mind of God. The mind of God as it has been clothed into our wisdom, into this world, so that as we progress and we learn it, we begin to bring into ourselves what it is that God wants. We become more godly, just like God himself, because the words that we are reading are the words of God himself. They have in no way changed. They are the spirituality of the godliness itself. With that, we come to the conclusion of this exciting section of Tanya. I hope that you've enjoyed it. And for my YouTube viewers, if you have enjoyed it, I ask you please to click on the like button, offer a positive comment to give me some encouragement, and click on the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel, and the bell button so that you can be informed later on of future shiurim. And of course, if you want to be in touch with me, please go to my site at www.lovingkindness.co. Be in touch with me. I would very much like to be in touch with you and become a partner in the activities that we're involved in. And let's talk about future projects that we can involve ourselves in together. With that, I thank you for joining me, and I wish you everything of the best. Bye-bye. Keep well. Shalom, shalom.